I was still holding her funeral program when my daughter-in-law told me to pack my bags. I said, okay, best decision I ever made. My name is Gerald Whitfield. I'm 64 years old. I spent 38 years as a construction engineer, built my own firm from nothing, and quietly put together a real estate portfolio worth $4.2 million before most people in my life even knew what a cap rate was. None of that was on display at Lorraine's funeral. I was just the husband. The one standing at the front of the church in a navy suit, shaking hands, accepting condolences, holding it together the way men my age were raised to do. Lorraine passed on a Tuesday morning in March. Pancreatic cancer, 8 months from diagnosis to the end. I was with her every single day of those 8 months. Every appointment, every bad night, every 3 a.m. when she couldn't sleep and just needed someone sitting in the chair next to her bed. We'd been married 36 years. You don't walk away from 36 years. The funeral was everything she deserved. The church was full. People drove in from 3 states. I sat in the front pew and listened to her children speak about her, and I was proud of every word they said. Milton, her youngest, talked about how she used to leave notes in his lunch bag when he was a kid. Roland, the oldest, read a poem she'd loved. Vivian, the middle one, could barely get through 2 sentences before she had to stop and breathe. I noticed Sylvia wasn't crying. Sylvia was Milton's wife. They'd been married 3 years. From the first time I met her, she had a way of looking at a room like she was calculating what everything in it was worth. I never said anything about it to Lorraine. No point stirring up trouble over a feeling. The reception was at our house afterward. The house I built with my own hands, and I mean that in the most literal sense possible. I bought the land in 2007. I drew the plans myself. I managed the construction and moved in with Lorraine in 2009. Every wall in that place, I know how it was put together because I was the one who made the decisions. Lorraine used to joke that she married the house and got me as a bonus. That afternoon, people came and went, ate the food the neighbors had dropped off, told me Lorraine would be missed. I thanked each of them and meant it. But the whole time, part of my attention was on Sylvia. She moved through the rooms like she was taking a survey, ran her hand along the kitchen countertop, stood in the doorway of the master bedroom for a moment too long, pulled Milton aside twice to whisper something I couldn't hear. She looked at the built-in bookshelves I'd put in the study and tilted her head the way people do when they're imagining something different in that space. I didn't say a word. I've been in enough negotiations to know that the man who speaks first usually loses. The last guest left around 8:30. I was in the kitchen loading the dishwasher, hands moving on autopilot because the rest of me was exhausted in a way I didn't have a word for when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate footsteps that stopped right at the edge of the kitchen. Gerald, not Mr. Whitfield. Not Dad, which is what Milton had called me since he was about 14, just Gerald. We need to talk. I kept loading plates. Okay? This house is too large for one person. You know that? I turned around. Sylvia was standing with her arms crossed, still in her black dress. The morning performance officially over. Behind her, Milton stood in the doorway. Roland and Vivian were just over his shoulder. None of them would look me in the eye. Lorraine took care of everything, Sylvia said. The finances, the household, all of it. Now that she's gone, you need to be realistic about your situation.
My situation, I built this house, I said.
She tilted her head slightly, the way you do when someone says something that doesn't quite register. Gerald, you haven't worked in years. We all know Lorraine was the one keeping things running. There's no reason for you to stay here alone. There are some very nice senior communities not far from here. You'd have people around, activities, support, senior communities. I had just buried my wife 6 hours ago. I looked at Milton. This was the boy I'd coached through Little League when he was 9 years old. The one I'd taught to drive in an empty parking lot on a Sunday morning. The one who called me on Father's Day every year until this one, he was staring at the floor. It just makes sense. Milton said quietly, we think you'd be more comfortable somewhere smaller. Roland nodded from the doorway. Vivian said nothing but didn't move to contradict anyone either. Pack your things tonight, Sylvia said. Milton and I can stay here to manage the transition. It'll be easier for everyone. I set the dish in my hand carefully into the rack. I didn't throw it. I didn't raise my voice. I just set it down and looked at each of them one more time. Okay, I said, I'll be gone by morning. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. They'd expected a fight, or tears, or begging. Instead, I walked upstairs, pulled 2 bags from the closet, and packed what I needed. Clothes, my laptop, the folder I kept in the nightstand with certain documents in it, and the small photo of Lorraine from our 2nd anniversary that I kept on my side of the dresser. Everything else I left. The tools in the garage, the the files in my office, the security camera system I'd installed 3 years earlier throughout the house, which was still transmitting live to my phone. I checked into the comfort suites off Route 9 just before 10 p.m., paid cash for a week. The clerk barely looked up. That was fine. I didn't need anyone looking at me just then. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and opened my phone and pulled up the camera app. The kitchen feed showed the overhead lights still on. The living room feed showed Milton and Sylvia on the couch talking. I couldn't hear them, but I didn't need to. I set the phone down and called Frederick Aldridge. Frederick has been my attorney for 22 years. Not Lorraine's attorney, mine. He handled the LLC filings, the property transfers, the estate planning we'd done quietly and carefully over the better part of 2 decades. Nobody in Lorraine's family knew he existed because nobody had ever thought to ask if I had my own legal team. They assumed I was the man who puttered around the house while the real work happened elsewhere. Frederick, I said when he picked up. They moved fast. How fast? She was already looking at the bedroom like she was picking out curtains. A pause. You want to proceed as we discussed. Let them get comfortable first, I said. Give them the weekend. I've been in construction for 38 years. You learn patience the hard way in that business. A foundation takes time. You don't rush the pour and you don't pull the forms before the concrete is cured. Do it too fast and the whole thing cracks. I had time, I had documents, and I had the weekend. The next morning I drove past the house not to confront anyone, just to see. Sylvia had already moved a piece of her own furniture onto the front porch. A lamp, one of those tall modern ones with a thin base, was sitting right next to the front door. She hadn't been there 12 hours and she was already swapping out what was mine. I kept driving, picked up coffee at a diner 2 miles down the road and sat in a booth by the window for a while. The waitress refilled my cup without being asked. Small thing, but I appreciated it. Back at the hotel, I opened the camera app and reviewed the overnight footage. What I saw was more than I expected. Around midnight, Sylvia had gone into my office. She tried the handle on the safe behind the bookcase. It didn't open because she didn't know the combination, but she tried it 3 times. Then she went to my desk and started going through the papers I'd left in the top drawer. Not important papers. I keep the real documents elsewhere. But she didn't know that. She pulled out a folder, laid it open on the desk, and used her phone to photograph every page. I watched this for about 4 minutes. Then I forwarded the footage timestamp and file to Frederick with 1 line for the file. He replied within the hour, received. This will be useful. I spent the rest of Saturday making calls. I have a property management company that handles the day-to-day on most of my units. I called the director, a steady woman named Patricia who has worked with me for 11 years, and let her know I was going through a family situation and to route anything urgent directly to Frederick for the time being. She expressed her condolences about Lorraine and asked no other questions. That is why I have kept her employed for 11 years. I called Nadine Harlow at the bank. Nadine manages my private accounts and has done so for 9 years. I told her I needed to move some liquid assets into a separate account as a precaution and have updated beneficiary paperwork drawn up. She said she could have everything ready by Monday morning. Sunday, I did nothing. I sat in the hotel room and watched the news and ate a sandwich from the deli down the block and let myself be still for 1 day. Grief is a strange thing. It doesn't announce itself on a schedule. It shows up when you're watching the weather report and you reach over out of habit to say something to the person who isn't there anymore. I gave myself Sunday. Monday, I went back to work. Frederick called first thing. They've hired an attorney, Leonard Graff, generalist practice over on 5th. He's filed a request for a formal reading of the will. All named parties required to be present. When Monday afternoon? 2 o'clock. I'll be there. Gerald, he paused. Once we walk into that room, there's no walking it back. You sure? I thought about Sylvia photographing my desk at midnight. I thought about Milton staring at the floor while his wife told the man who raised him to go find a senior community. I've been sure for 15 years, I said. Let's go. That morning I drove to the bank and met with Nadine. She had everything laid out on a conference table, organized the way I like. Clean and in order. We went through the account adjustments and I signed the updated paperwork. She looked up from the documents at one point with an expression I recognized as professional surprise. Mr. Whitfield, she said, I want to make sure these transfers are structured correctly given the timing. Everything is in order on our end, but I want you to have full clarity. I appreciate that, Nadine. That's why I called you and not someone else. She nodded and we finished the paperwork without further comment. Afterward, I went shopping, not at any discount place. I went to the store where I used to buy my work clothes back when I had site meetings with clients, the kind of store where the staff knows the difference between a suit that fits and one that merely covers you. I bought a clean shirt, had my good boots polished at the shop 2 doors down and went back to the hotel to get ready. I'm not a man who dresses to impress other people. But I am a man who knows that how you walk into a room tells people something before you say a single word. I wanted to walk into that room looking exactly like what I was, not a grieving widower with nowhere to go. A man who had been building something for 40 years and was about to let everyone in that room see it for the first time. I arrived at Leonard Graff's office at 1:45, took a seat in the waiting area, and poured myself a cup of the bad coffee they had on the side table. The receptionist asked if I needed anything else. I said no thank you and sat quietly and waited. I could hear Sylvia's voice coming from down the hall before I saw her. She was telling Leonard Graff something about the house, about the upkeep costs, about how she and Milton had already started looking into what repairs needed to be done. She walked into the waiting area and stopped when she saw me. She recovered quickly, gave me a tight nod. Milton came in behind her, then Roland and Vivian. Nobody said hello. Frederick arrived at 2 o'clock exactly. He had Carolyn Beckett with him. Carolyn handles litigation. She is not a warm person in a professional setting, and that is exactly what I needed her to be. We filed into the conference room and took our seats across from each other. Leonard Graff shuffled his papers and cleared his throat and began. Leonard Graff read the way men read when they've done something 1,000 times and stopped caring about it. Flat voice, steady pace, eyes on the paper. The standard language first, the declarations. The charitable bequests Lorraine had specified a few $100s each to 2 organizations she'd supported for years. Then the part everyone had been waiting for. To my beloved children Milton, Roland, and Vivian, I leave the sum of $45,000 each to be distributed in equal shares. Sylvia's jaw moved slightly. Not enough that anyone else would notice. I noticed. To my husband, Gerald Whitfield, I leave the remainder of my estate, all properties, accounts, and personal assets to be his absolutely and without restriction. Leonard Graff kept reading. Nobody was listening anymore. Roland leaned forward. I'm sorry, could you say that last part again? Graff repeated it. The remainder, Vivian said slowly. What does that mean exactly? What's left after the $45,000 each? That was when Carolyn Beckett opened her briefcase. She did it without drama, without any kind of announcement. Just set 2 folders on the table and slid the first one across to Leonard Graff with the calm efficiency of someone who has done this exact thing many times before. The property at 4 Birchwood Lane, Carolyn said, has been held in Gerald Whitfield's sole name since 2009. Mr. Whitfield purchased the land in 2007, financed and managed the construction personally, and has held the deed continuously since the home was completed. Mrs. Whitfield held lifetime occupancy rights, ownership transferred to Mr. Whitfield completely and without condition at the time of purchase. Sylvia picked up the deed from the folder. Her face went the kind of white that doesn't come from shock alone. It comes from realizing that the ground you've been standing on was never yours. That's not possible, Milton said. He never worked. I mean, not in years. Where did the money come from? I leaned forward slightly in my chair. I worked for 38 years, Milton. I started my own engineering firm at 33. And before I ever met your mother, I had already been building a real estate portfolio for close to a decade. I just didn't talk about it at the dinner table. But you always seemed like you were just around, Roland said. He looked immediately uncomfortable after saying it, like he heard how it sounded. I was around, I said. That was a choice. Doesn't mean I was idle. Carolyn was already opening the second folder. Ridgeline Holdings LLC was established in 1998. Mr. Whitfield is the sole owner. The company currently holds 14 properties across Georgia, Florida, and Tennessee. She placed the summary sheet on the table and let it sit there for a moment before she continued. Combined appraised value as of last quarter, $4.2 million. The number sat in the room like something solid. Vivian made a sound under her breath. Roland sat back in his chair. Milton looked at Sylvia. Sylvia was still staring at the sheet. You're telling us, she said finally, that he owns $2 million in property and nobody in this family knew about it. Mrs. Whitfield knew, Frederick said. Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield made a mutual decision early in their marriage to keep Gerald's financial affairs private. Lorraine was fully informed at all times. Then why, Sylvia said, and her voice had gone tight and careful the way a person's voice gets when they're trying not to lose control of it. Did she let us believe he had nothing? Why did she let us think she was carrying everything? I looked at her directly for the first time since we'd sat down. Lorraine didn't let you believe anything, I said. You assumed there's a difference. You assumed because it was convenient for you to assume. Because if I had nothing, this was all a lot simpler. She opened her mouth. Closed it. You called me a freeloader, I said. The night we buried her in my own kitchen, you told me I'd never contributed anything and that I needed to find appropriate housing. You said it in front of all 3 of her children and none of them corrected you. The room was very quiet. What you didn't know, I continued, was that the house you were standing in was in my name The mortgage Lorraine appeared to be managing was paid from my accounts. The property taxes, the insurance, the utilities, all of it came from Ridgeline Holdings. Lorraine's income covered groceries and personal expenses. I covered the rest. I have 15 years of bank statements that say exactly that. Carolyn slid a third document across the table without a word. Bank records organized by year, showing the transfer pattern clearly. Leonard Graff was looking at the ceiling in the way attorneys look at the ceiling when they realize they've been handed a case that was already over before it started. The camera footage Carolyn added almost as an afterthought from the security system Mr. Whitfield installed at the property in 2021 has also been preserved. It includes recordings from Saturday night, approximately midnight, showing activity in Mr. Whitfield's private office. She looked at Sylvia without expression. We've retained a copy. Sylvia went very still. I had not planned to say anything further at that point, but I looked at her sitting there across the table in the chair she'd claimed like it already belonged to her, and I thought about her voice in my kitchen the night Lorraine died, flat and certain and already making plans. You have 72 hours to remove your belongings from my house, I said. After that, I'll have the locks changed. I pushed back my chair and stood up. Mr. Whitfield, Leonard Graff started. My attorney will be in touch with yours, I said. Have a good afternoon. I walked out of that conference room without looking back. Frederick fell into step beside me in the hallway, and we rode the elevator down in silence. When we reached the lobby, he said, "That went about as well as it could have. Better," I said. I meant it. The calls started that same evening. Sylvia first. I let it go to voicemail. She called again 40 minutes later. I let that one go too. Then Milton called. Then Sylvia a third time. I turned the phone face down on the hotel nightstand and watched the evening news until I fell asleep. In the morning, there was a voicemail from Sylvia that I listened to while drinking coffee by the window. Her voice was different from the night of the funeral. The certainty was gone. What was left sounded like a person trying very hard to sound calm while not being calm at all. Gerald, I think we got off on the wrong foot, and I'd like to sit down and talk through this reasonably. We're family. There has to be a way to work this out that's fair to everyone. Fair to everyone. I set the phone down and finished my coffee. On Wednesday, Milton came to the hotel in person. I didn't turn him away. I met him in the lobby, and we sat in two chairs near the window that looked out onto the parking lot. He had bags under his eyes, and his shoulders were carrying the particular kind of weight that comes from a few bad nights strung together. I owe you an apology, he said. He wasn't looking for a reaction when he said it. He just said it and let it sit there. I know you do, I said. He nodded. Sylvia told me for a long time that you'd never really been part of this family, that you were just someone Mom took care of. I knew it didn't feel right. I've known you since I was 9 years old. I know who you are. He stopped and looked at his hands, but I let her do the talking. I let her do the thinking. And that night in the kitchen I should have said something, and I didn't. No, I said, you didn't. I'm not asking you to forgive me right now. I don't expect that. Good, because I'm not there yet. He looked up. There was something in his face I hadn't seen from him in a few years. Directness. Like he'd stopped rehearsing what he was going to say and was just saying it. What I want you to know, he said, is that I remember who you are. Not the man with the LLC and the 14 properties. I mean the man who sat in the bleachers at every single one of my games in the rain. Who stayed up with me the night before my driving test going over parallel parking in the church parking lot. Who never once made me feel like I was less important than if I'd been your biological son. His voice caught slightly on that last part. He cleared his throat. I threw that away for a woman who left the moment the money wasn't there, and I have to live with that. I was quiet for a moment. You didn't throw it away, I said. You put it down. Whether you pick it back up is up to you. He didn't say anything to that. Sometimes the right response to something honest is just to let it land. Go figure out who you are without someone else telling you, I said. Then we'll talk, he left. And I watched him walk across the parking lot to his car. And I thought about the 9-year-old kid who used to fall asleep on the couch watching football and have to be carried to bed. People are not just one thing. Milton had been weak when it mattered most. He had also been, for most of his life, a decent person. Both of those things were true at the same time. I drove to the house at exactly 6 p.m. on the final evening of the 72-hour window. Their cars were in the driveway. More cars than I expected. I recognized Milton's truck, Roland's sedan, Vivian's hatchback. There were two others I didn't recognize. I walked to the front door and used my key. They hadn't changed the locks. It hadn't occurred to them that I still had one. The voices in the living room stopped the moment they heard the door. I came around the corner and found them arranged around the room in a way that told me this had been organized in advance. Sylvia was in the center, standing. Milton and Roland were on either side. Vivian was near the window, and on the couch, looking like they'd been given a version of events that didn't entirely add up, were a man and a woman I recognized as Harvey and Gloria Oakes. Sylvia's parents, she'd brought reinforcements. Gerald, Sylvia said, she had gathered herself back together since the conference room. Voice level, posture straight. We were hoping you'd come by. We'd like to discuss a reasonable settlement. There's nothing to settle, I said. You have about 20 minutes left on your 72 hours. Harvey Oakes stood up from the couch. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, the kind of build that comes from 40 years of actual physical work. He'd been an electrician his whole career. I'd always respected that about him, even though we'd never had more than a handful of real conversations. Mrs. Oakes, Mr. Oakes, I said. I'm glad you're here, actually. Harvey looked at me steadily. Sylvia tells us there's been some kind of misunderstanding about Richard's estate. My name is Gerald, I said, and there's no misunderstanding, but I'd like you to hear what happened directly from me. I told them I didn't editorialize, I didn't raise my voice. I laid out the evening of the funeral, what Sylvia had said, the camera footage of her in my office at midnight, the documents, all of it. Harvey Oakes stood with his arms at his sides and listened to every word. When I finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. Harvey turned to look at his daughter. The look on his face was not anger exactly. It was something closer to grief, the particular kind that comes from recognizing something in someone you love that you wish you hadn't seen. Sylvia Marie, he said quietly, you threw this man out of his own house the night he buried his wife. Sylvia started to speak. Don't, Harvey said. He didn't say it loudly. He didn't have to. Gloria Oakes picked up her purse from the cushion beside her. She looked at me and said, I'm sorry, Gerald. For all of it, then she touched Harvey's arm and they walked to the door together. Sylvia watched her parents leave. She didn't move to follow them or call after them. She just stood in the middle of my living room and watched the front door close. 20 minutes, I said. Then I went to the kitchen to wait. They were gone within the hour. Roland and Vivian carried boxes without making eye contact with me. Milton moved quietly, efficiently, like a man trying to take up as little space as possible. Sylvia directed the last of it with her back straight and her chin up, which I will give her credit for. Whatever else she wasn't going to collapse in front of me. When the last car pulled out of the driveway, I stood at the window and watched the taillights disappear around the corner. Then I called Frederick. It's done, I said. They're gone. How do you feel? I looked around the living room. A few things were out of place where boxes had been stacked and moved. The rug was slightly crooked. Other than that, it was exactly as I had left it 10 days earlier. Like myself, I said. First time in a while. I hung up and spent the next hour just walking through the house, not looking for anything, not checking on anything, just being in the rooms that Lorraine and I had shared for 15 years, letting them feel like mine again. I straightened the rug. I went out to the garage and ran my hand along the workbench I'd built in 2011, the one with the oak top that took me 3 weekends to get level. Everything was still there. Everything was still solid. I went to bed that night in my own bed for the first time since the funeral and slept straight through until morning. 6 months passed. Roland called in April. Vivian called a week after that. Those were hard conversations, honest ones, the kind where nobody walks away feeling entirely good, but everybody walks away knowing more truth than they came in with. I didn't close any doors. I didn't fling them open either. We are figuring it out slowly, which is probably the only way to figure out something like this. Sylvia, I have not heard from. I don't expect to. Some bridges hold the weight you put on them and some don't, and there's no point pretending otherwise. Milton called on a Saturday morning in May. He was calling from a studio apartment on the east side of town. Sylvia had left in February, he said. Told him she hadn't signed up for the version of their life that didn't include an inheritance. He said it without bitterness, which told me he had spent some time sitting with it. I told him to come over. He showed up an hour later and found me in the garage with the hood up on Lorraine's old Buick. That car had been sitting there for 2 years with an idle problem I'd never gotten around to fixing. I handed Milton a wrench without explaining anything, and he took it without asking any questions. We worked for the better part of 2 hours. Didn't talk much. There is a particular kind of silence that exists between two people who are doing something useful together, and it is not uncomfortable. It is actually one of the better things in life if you have the patience for it. At some point, Milton said, I should have said something that night. When she told you to pack your bags, I should have stood up. Yes, I said, you should have. I'm going to do better. I looked at him across the engine block. He was 38 years old, and for maybe the first time in his adult life he was standing in a room without someone else's voice telling him who to be. That is a hard place to arrive at. It is also the only place worth starting from. I know you are, I said. We got the Buick running before noon. It idled rough at first and then smoothed out, and I let it run for a few minutes in the driveway just to make sure it would hold. Lorraine had loved that car more than was entirely reasonable. She would have been glad to know it still ran. I'm still in this house. I drink my coffee on the back steps every morning and watch the light come up over the yard. The roses Lorraine planted along the fence came back this spring, same as every year, without anyone asking them to. Some things are just built to last. I did not plan any of what happened. I did not spend 15 years setting a trap. I spent 15 years building something real, protecting it the right way, and trusting that the truth would hold up when it needed to. It did. If there's anything I would want a man to take from this, it is that. Not the money, not the legal strategy, not the moment in the conference room when the number landed on the table. Just this: do the work, build the thing. Keep your records clean and your attorney's number handy. And do not let anyone tell you your value while you're standing in the middle of everything you built. The quiet ones are usually building something, they just don't announce it. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been counted out by someone who didn't bother to look at what you'd actually built? Have you ever had to let the truth do the talking because words weren't going to cut it? Drop a comment below. I read every one of them. And check the end screen for 2 more stories from this channel that I think you'll appreciate.